Well, here I am on the grid at Silverstone, about to start off on a couple of laps of the 2.9-mile circuit. You'll find it rather difficult to get into these modern cars because there's so little space in the cockpit. But once you're in the seat, you'll find it far more comfortable than it looks. I found after the absence of about 2 or 3 years, I suppose, that single-seater cockpits have shrunk quite a bit. And I'd thought that my old Formula 1 Cooper was as small as you could get there. The low screen, by the way, keeps out the wind very effectively, even though you look over the top when you're driving. Now we build up to about 7,000 revs on the clock and get away to a fast start, heading down the pit straight towards the first bend, Copse. Copse is a right-angle bend, and we enter it from the left of the road and then keeping in close to the apex. You build up power in the last part, letting the car go wide at the exit, lining up for the short straight. You straighten out maggots as much as possible, but on the exits you don't use all the road, as this slight left curve is followed by an important right-hander. We enter Beckett's from the middle, or slightly left of the middle of the track. Turning in fairly early, we keep the car to the right for as long as possible. Then when we feel we can't hold it there any longer, we pay it out to the left, leaving the bend in the centre of the road. Still near the centre of the track, we flatten Chapel Curve as much as possible, this time using all the available road as we exit. We approach Stowe from the left, turning in fairly early and moving over to a late apex. Then the car is drifted under power across the road and to the left, so that we are lined up correctly for the short straight before Club Corner. Club is another fast right-hander, and again we turn in earlier than normal. By the way, rain often leaves puddles of water on this corner, and one's got to keep a sharp lookout for them. Abbey can be tricky in a fast car, and in some ways it's the key to the circuit. If we take this flat out, we can save up to 1/5 of a second on our lap times in the fastest cars, and that can amount to an important margin in a 100-lap race. We need to use all the road here as the bend tightens up. Taking care not to do it too soon, we pull over to the extreme right at the long apex and then let the car clip the grass on the left in front of the stands. Now I'll take you on another fast lap of the circuit, and you'll see what Silverstone looks like to a competitor driving at speed. Cooper Cosworth Ford, belonging to the Normand racing team. Downhanger straight, usually the fastest part of the circuit. This short straight between Stowe and Club Corner is important. It's very difficult to gear for it. Abbey Curve has to be taken flat out during a race. Silverstone was the home of the British Grand Prix for quite a long time, and to me it brings memories of over 100,000 people attending meetings, particularly when the Daily Express used to run their events there because of the publicity that they gave to it. But it means perhaps a lot more than that. It means testing. It's a great test track really, because I've been there with Aston Martins, with Van Wall and Coopers and all sorts of cars and tried them round the place. It's one of those circuits that really gets much faster the more you know it. It's quite a difficult circuit. First of all, the lap speed, of course, is well in excess of 100 miles an hour on the faster cars, but apart from that, there are an awful lot of corners, and if you lose a little on a corner, of course you lose on the following straight, but at Silverstone this seems to matter more than one might imagine. And because there's no character, and there are no trees and bushes to go by, it is quite difficult to get the best out of your car until you know it pretty well. I mean, it's true there are brake marker points and things like that, but I don't personally like to rely upon these, which is just as well, because when you're practicing they aren't always there anyway. But I feel that it is better to try to come up to a corner and judge your braking by the depth perception. In other words, you see you're 100 yards away and you know roughly how long it takes to stop from the speed you're doing, and you know roughly what speed you can get round the corner by the look of it on approaching it. Now, I remember that I think the first thing that was big as far as I was concerned was I went there and tested a van wall, and I drove it in, I think it was the Daily Express meeting in 1956, and I was lucky enough to win with this at just over 100 miles an hour. I think this was the first time that the race had been won at over 100. In fact, I'm not so sure that it wasn't the first time it had been lapped at over 100. Well, that's a long time ago, and of course 100 miles an hour now doesn't mean much at Silverstone. But then later on I remember going there with Rob Walker's 2.5 litre Intercontinental Cooper on a completely barren day. There was nobody around at all, and I managed to lap at 117 miles an hour, which of course is totally unofficial, but it meant quite a lot to me, because it was something that we were trying to do, was to improve this car ready to go off to Australasia and America. And so, knowing the circuit and knowing quite a lot about the place itself, it's always seemed to me as a good thing to use, because you had a set time that you knew you could do at the start of the year, and you should be able to go back there and do it most of the time, weather conditions permitting, and therefore you can develop a motor car. And this is one of the advantages of Silverstone. You can get there most of the time. Another thing that I remember was being pretty stupid. I went there in a C-type Jaguar, and I remember trying to get to a certain speed, and to do this I came to the conclusion the only way that I could achieve it was to go round Abbey Curve flat out. Well, I approached Abbey Curve, and everything was pretty good, and there was a slower car who was well out of my way really, but I had to slightly change my line, and I still kept flat out. I wasn't smart enough to back off and say, well, I'll try and do it next lap. So I took it flat out. I can assure you that it was possible to take it flat out in the C-type, but if you did, in my case and with my ability, you finished up upside down, which is exactly what did happen. I think it may have been the 100-mile-an-hour lap I was trying for, but I do know I turned the C-type over, which sticks in my mind, not because I turned it over, but because it's one of the few accidents when I decided to try and stay with the car and tuck down inside. It laid me out, but otherwise I was unhurt, although it did split my helmet in half and bruised my forehead, but no more than that. And of course I remember Silverstone for the Maston Gregory shunt, when Maston was going into Woodcote, obviously a little bit over his head, in a bit of trouble, and he decided the best thing to do was to just get out of the car and stand back and watch the accident. Well, he did this without really hurting himself much, which I think is some credit to his agility of getting out of that machine, because when they're moving at the speed that he was doing, it's not easy to get out. The next thing that comes to my mind about Silverstone, I suppose, is when I took my sister Pat there. This is years ago, and I was not teaching her quite how to drive, because she could drive, but I was trying to teach her how to go a bit faster. It was long before she had reached the fame that she has now with rallying, and I took her around there in an MG, I think it was an MG, and I noticed that going into the corners that she was lifting off rather early. So I thought, well, the way to get her to understand that this is early is to, next time she eases off, I'm going to say stop, make it a crash stop. Well, we're going into Stowe, and I noticed that 200 yards away, she was just feathering back on the throttle, so I screamed at her to stop. Of course, she put the brakes on and came to a halt before we'd even reached the corner, which one would expect the car to do. So I said to her, what are you doing here? And she said to me, well, you told me to stop. And I said, well, I didn't tell you to stop until you lifted off the throttle, so it shows how much too early you were backing off. Well, all I can do is I can assure you that the next lap or two were quite exciting. Maybe more exciting by the fact that I got a little bit worried about another car or tractor that was there and pulled the handbrake on in rather a bad place and spun Pat off into the grass. This was entirely my fault and it wasn't hers. I know it took her by surprise, but these things do happen. Now, another thing that I remember about Silverstone was the 1961 race, the Daily Express Trophy race, which was run in pouring wet, and I had a Cooper there, Rob Walker's Cooper, and I really thought that I was in for a bad day. I wasn't feeling like driving, and all sorts of things. And Louise Bryden-Brown, who had at one time sponsored Dan Gurney, came up to me before the race and gave me a Mayan God. A Mayan God is a Mexican thing of good luck, I believe, and anyway, I hung it round my neck, or put it in my pocket or something, and went out, and I was lucky enough to go into that race and win it, and I did actually lap the rest of the field, and so I reckon that that Mayan God was a good luck thing, and I still to this day hang it round my neck. All I can say is it's just as well I've given up racing and I haven't got a lot more things to hang round my neck, because it's there with a St. Christopher and a horseshoe. Well, that particular day at Silverstone is the last memory of racing that I have at Silverstone, because it was a particularly good day. I won that race I didn't expect to win, and I also won, I think, a sports car race in a Lotus 19, and this obviously is happy memories to me, and this is the last thing that I can remember, except having been there, of course, to make this film and on a few other occasions such as that.